Walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors. Walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path. Life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Wowdy Yassid, and I'm a plant walker, song keeper, word weaver, artisana, visual and performance artist, womb wisdom keeper, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the Serpentine Path, where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Serpentine Path podcast, or welcome for the first time. I'm extremely excited because I have a dear sister and friend here to share lots of beautiful medicine. So please welcome me in introducing Allegra to the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire. I'm so happy to be here. It feels like we're sitting in a little apartment in New York and having tea and catching up, and that feels amazing. I'm so happy.
Beautiful. Well, I'd love to start off by asking you the question that I've been asking all of my guests who have been coming on recently, which is if your ancestors were here with us now, which of course they are, how would they introduce you and what role would they say that you play in your family lineage?
Mm. I picture them giggling as they're all like conspiring together, like this is Allegra. She she came with roots, deep roots, and this tree energy, and at the same time is like our household jelly bean. And she came to bring a lot of wisdom through joy, a deep thinker, and also wiggly mover. And I feel like they would say something about all the time we spend together, my ancestors and I, dancing and listening. Um, we have a lot of good times together. So we would just be laughing about that, and they would introduce me as one of their messengers that's here to bring some future stuff, but also is listening deeply to the ancestral, the roots, the whatever's underneath, whatever came before us in a really playful way.
Yeah, beautiful. Being that bridge of
Hmm.
information to come through and to be channeled and to, like you said, like maintain that connection to what your roots are and to also be reaching up into the celestial and
Hmm.
holding on to those teachings and those wisdoms from our star beings and that family up there. And yeah, I don't know. For some reason there's a vision coming through of you just like having roots that reach into the core of the earth and then like really, really tall branches that are just up in the stars.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful image. Cool. Well, I'd love to share a little bit about just our origin story and how I met you. So I was thinking about this the other day when I was thinking about this podcast, and I was like, whoa, we met essentially, no, yeah, more than 10 years ago, actually, which is insane. Time is crazy. Time is obviously not how we think it is. But I was thinking about that and I was like, holy shit, we met when we were 18 years old at NYU as little dance majors.
Uh-huh.
Fish dance. And I was thinking about kind of like my first impressions of you. And I remember seeing you, and you said something so funny, and the way you delivered it was like so dry and so bland. And I asked a friend, I was like, who's that person? And they were like, that's Allegra. She's from Miami. It was like, I feel like it was the first time I met someone from Miami. And I was like, they were like, yeah, she's like so Miami, right? And I was like, I don't know what that means. And then I getting to know you over the years, and I'm kind of like a shy, slow person to develop friendships. But all of these layers that I uncovered about you every time, I was like, who is this girl? Like, she's so funny and she's so deeply aligned on her path, and she's really compassionate, and she's also hyper intellectual and beautifully communicative and just like absolutely silly and crazy and like who is she? She's just this beautiful enigma, a person that just continues to unfold in front of me. And it was such a blessing to continue to get to know you. So, and then when I think about kind of how our paths have transformed and traversed and kind of woven in and out over the years as well, and the times that we've taken distance from our friendships and the times that we've come back, and how we've always somehow also been on the same trajectory in a lot of our interests, in a lot of the things that we bring to the world. And it'll be I'm like over here doing my thing, and then I look over and you're like riding a very similar wave, and I'm like,
Yeah.
shit. And I feel like that's similar to a lot of my friendships, which is that the beautiful thing about how relationships often go. Like
Mhm.
you grow apart, but you grow together, and then you grow back in. It's just that weaving. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Super cool.
So
Mm.
yeah, I just feel very blessed to have such a beautiful friend and woman like you in my life. And I'd love to give you the opportunity to share just more about like your upbringing, your family, any of the kind of, as I said, like when we were talking before we started recording, like that spiritual stew that you were developing in, and what your path has looked like over the past, I guess, 28 years. It's like almost your birthday. So,
Yeah.
what has the first portion of your life pre Saturn return looked like?
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, it's an important time. Um, and I also just want to say that I feel the same way about you and watching your transformation. And when we first, I don't even think about it anymore, but right now I called it that image of Claire when I first met her, and she was so much more like not type A, but definitely had this air of like she has it together. And the metaphor of your feet and like the just that technique. And she was so strong, and you still are, but in a totally different dynamic. Um, and seeing all the ways that you've transformed and those moments where it feels like, where is Claire? But then you still found your way, and there's something really cool, which is this intensity that you go into everything with, that now I'm like, whoa, I trust your intensity so much because you're doing Claire's path, and you're not holding back, and it's really important
Thank you.
for you to exist in the way that you do, and you're doing it no matter what. So I'm grateful too. that you're here and we're both here on these things. Um, yeah, NYU, what the heck? That was like my dream school. It's all very funny. I used to really like suffering, I think, and that it felt really meaningful to suffer. Um, but I was born and raised in Miami Beach, and my mom's from Argentina, my dad's from Spain. They met in Spain, they moved to the US, and I often tell people they were joined by a spiritual longing, a very unique call to like get out of what they knew in the material and in the physical and in the ancestral as well in the family, and they were really looking for a teacher and like shamans and prayer and that's what they connected about. Because then there were often times where I was like, my parents are the most incompatible people I've ever met. But then in a lot of the healing, I was like, oh, that's what connected them was the spiritual search, and that sustained them forever. So they came to the US literally looking for the Red Road people, like the Native Americans. They had this whole fantasy about that they would show up in Arizona and be like in a sitting around a fire with, some Indian chief with the feathers who would serve them something amazing and they would see God. And then they got to Arizona and they were at an Indian reservation and were exposed to a lot of alcoholism and all of this paradox, and they were really disheartened. But that brought them to the US, and then they ended up in Miami through like mutual friends and very quickly were connected. What found them was this Sufi group, and Sufism is a mystic branch of Islam. And my mom she's Argentinian Jew. My dad is like Roman Catholic, born in Madrid. So I often say too, like, there's Nazi blood and Jewish blood running through me heavy. So they get together, end up in Miami, and find Islam. And through that, they find their group of friends, a group of people that were getting really into the spiritual practice and had kids. And so I grew up around that, which was really interesting because it was like, then I was 7, 8 years old, and it was like 9/11, and it was the whole peak of all this like Islamophobia and all this, like Allahu Akbar, and then a bomb going off. And that's what my parents were doing in their Sufi group every Saturday night, like praying heavily to Allah. And so there was all this weird confusion. At the same time, I would sometimes go to temple, and I grew up on Miami Beach and had all these Jewish friends, and I knew I was Jewish. I went to a Jewish preschool. Um, and then at the same time, my parents were also kind of yogis, like meditating. My dad would meditate a lot, and I would sit with him, and the image of like his little meditation stool, all of that was very ingrained as well. And then just growing up around the ocean and being in Miami, and I loved like being in my body and being outside and was very fantastical, creative. And so that was like the beginning of the soup. And I really like my first memories were really with Islam. And then we would go to Spain during Christmas and have like the full Christmas tree and all of that tradition. And my dad's side of the family, it was like Christmas. And all of that was mixed in, and there was some confusion, but there wasn't like it wasn't a heavy question in me. It was just like, oh, there's a lot happening here. And sometimes it felt like I had to mediate what I told each person. And I knew I didn't fully understand things, but we had a lot of beautiful experiences. We would travel to ceremonies. We would go to these zikrs in Switzerland. And it was like that's what drove my parents. We would travel for spiritual things. Then my sister was born, and my mom did her 500-hour teacher training. And at that point, I was already like 11, 12 years old. And so then the yoga came in really strong. Then my mom did her Buddhist rites. So then the Buddhism came in really strong. So my brother and I like grew up around the Islam and the Judaism and the Christmas stuff a lot. And then my sister, who's 11 years younger than me, grew up really Buddhist. And she's so funny because to this day she has her altar with her medicine Buddha, and she's met these high lamas and has been on retreat with these high Buddhist lamas, and everything's just, and literally if you walk around our house, there's like the Christmas tree was up, the Buddha was up, the menorah's up, there's like the Sufi prayers above the doors, there's the mezuzahs on the door frames. It's like everything. And then there's the yoga. And I grew up around all that. And I had this strong call towards art and towards my own creative practices. I was always journaling in my room, very like introverted. My mom, very extroverted, my brother. And so we would go to all these spiritual things. And then it was like me in my room kind of processing all of this, which is still how I operate. And and a little bit later, like around 11, 12 years old, I started dancing really heavily. I was just like, I'm gonna do this thing. And that I think was how I first started to feel whatever spirit was moving through me. But it felt totally unrelated to all of that influence. Like I was like, I also thought at one point that everybody was like this. Like I thought everybody's parents had a Sufi group or a spiritual group that they would go to, but just different to my parents. And so all of that was, it was just a lot of this, but really beautiful. And it took me a long time to start to like integrate it and understand what was mine, what was theirs, what was true, what was interesting to me, what wasn't, what was necessary, what wasn't. And and then it's interesting because it all came around eventually to the indigenous way that they were looking for when they got to the US. And the first time I went to the moon dance, which we can get into later, but I was so emotional because I understood that I was going to the lands different, like Mount Shasta, but the West Coast, the lands that my parents had originally unioned and gone to searching for something. And now I had come all the way back around and it had found me in like the cleanest, most beautiful way I could find and all of these indigenous teachings. And then it had so much to do with the dance training. So there was this like spiritual seed that was planted, then this long dance art training that felt kind of divorced from the spirit stuff, but I was moving a lot in my body. A lot was starting to alchemize without me even knowing it. And then 25, 26 years later, it was like all of that came together at the Danza de la Luna, which was like ceremony, indigenous spirit through your body, through movement, through the earth, through beauty, through fun. Um, and that's where everything started to like settle in and make sense. Yoga was a huge part of that too. So, yeah, the question has no answer because it's like there were always more. I see it as sort of ripples in water, and there was always another ripple, and there's another ripple, and it's like, oh wait, the yoga's there too, the dance there is too, the Judaism's there. It's like, but basically, I grew up with people who had no, absolutely no boundary for their spiritual practice and their curiosity about religion and spirit and God, and no sort of qualm about mixing the things. Obviously, they got some, were met with resistance from family members and from people like, okay, you're Jewish, but you're studying Islam. You're doing Islam, but now you're doing yoga. But it was like everything was fair game. And that was really something different to grow up around and has heavily influenced the way I move through the world and through God now.
So beautiful and really very not a super common story like you were saying. I feel like there's a lot of people whose parents find one path and that's kind of like what they do and maybe they're not so open to it or they're like totally atheist and not open to it at all and like the kid has to figure it out or like their parents kind of don't really have a spiritual practice but like are totally fine with the kid moving through like there's when I think about my own parents and their relationship to God and how grateful I am that they've really given me just like complete and total freedom to kind of figure it out.
Hmm.
Also have to acknowledge that like their relationship with spirit is like also perfect
Hmm.
and that like they're not meant to do it the way that I have.
Yeah.
Release any judgment or to stop trying to push them in one direction or another, but to just really be like, okay, this is the chapter of our lineage that you have taken on. And like I have my chapter that
Yeah.
it's just kind of what you were saying, the continuation of the threads of what our whole bloodline is trying to do here on this earth, right? So that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I'd love to touch on something that interweaves a lot with what you were talking about with your experience in the moon dance and like how your understanding of what dance is was so transformed in that commitment that it's a 4 year long commitment, right? In that commitment to being a moon dancer and what that require of you. But you and I, we met at NYU. We met at this um what is the word, like kind of top dance program in the country,
Yeah.
physical training, like really rigid, like, freaking 8 a.m. Pilates, 9 a.m. ballet, like 10:30 postmodern dance class. Hilarious that we didn't actually do any codified modern, but whatever. Some listeners will understand that phrase, some won't. Um, but just like so rigid and strict. Like you were saying, when you met me, I was like so tight in that, like hyper perfectionist, controlled, like whatever. And in ways you also were too.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was. You can't survive in that kind of a world without being kind of like hyper type A controlling perfectionist in ways.
Yeah.
And due to that, you and I both, and I would say probably every single person, man and woman in the whole dance program, were also really struggling with disordered eating patterns, right? And it was something that you and I and many different women in our class were kind of like noticing in each other and picking up on and talking about and like say noticing it in someone else, but like not wanting to do it in ourselves and all of this.
Yeah.
And then I also think about that experience of disembodiment from
Mm-hmm.
my bones, from my flesh, from my fat, from my blood, from my breath, all of that, and how classical dance and that form of dance training is really, at least from my experience, was this tool that really like separated me from what I now know dance to be, which is like a ceremonial practice and expression of joy and grief and beauty and mourning and devotion and prayer and like
Yeah.
just all of it, right? And so I love to give you the space to go a little bit
Mm.
deeper into that transformation that movement has had in your life. And
Yeah.
yeah, I guess just like, as you said, starting at like 12, 13, and like where you're at now, like
Mm-hmm.
what has dance kind of brought to you?
Whoa. Yeah, it's like when I look back on it, dance at the beginning was such an up here decision. And I think when we talk about the NYU and everything that came before that and that whole environment, it can get kind of like, wow, that was really crap. Um, and there was a lot of beauty, but I think a lot of it was driven by mental illness, like just and it, and I acknowledge that because I really do acknowledge that it was perfect and I don't think it could have gone any other way. Um, I feel now I haven't even tapped it. Like I don't know anybody that goes to NYU. I feel like it's different now. I don't know for sure, but I feel energetically when I look back on that time, like especially the women in our class, we were sustaining like the leading edge of the end of something that was very toxic that had permeated dance and women's bodies forever. Something that was also very specific to my experience is while I was in high school and while I was in college, dance and modeling was very paired for me. And
Oh,
people would mention it to me, but I was kind of like, oh, that must affect you so much that you're modeling and dancing at the same time. And these are the two careers known as that it creates all this disorder and obsession with the way you look. And I would kind of write it off. And now I'm like, that was so intense. And that little girl was, I can't even imagine, I can't even believe that was me. I'm like, wow, this body could not handle that now.
yeah.
And thank God. And so I remember there was a very clear decision at 11 or 12 where I was just like, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna go harder than anybody. And that literally felt so right. Like I was like, this is the right thing. And it was this whole like work hard, da da da. And everything was the response to that was affirmed. It was like, yes, yes, Allegra works hard, Allegra's diligent,
Disciplined.
crazy. Like, and maybe it wasn't crazy at the time. I don't know. It was a different frequency at that time too, but I was just like, I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do this. And I was not a good dancer, you know? So I was like, and I was so aware of that. But I was like, I have to work extra hard because of my knees and my points and I'm all these theories I had made up and everything was like affirmed. And my ballet teacher at New World was like, yes, you do have horrible knees. Like, no, like now I'm like, what the actual F? Yeah, that felt really important. It felt like I just put myself on a track and I couldn't fail. And it was like affirmed, 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 because then I got into NYU and I got this amazing scholarship and everything was just like, oh, that hard work paid off. And then I would just add another, drop of juice into the vial of poison. And it was like, oh, that was affirmed. So now I need to turn it up a notch. I need to work harder. I need to restrict here. I need to push more there. Nothing was about softness or listening or feeling anything. Everything was just emotion to like, how can I feel less and produce more? I don't even know what I was producing, just like circling in a room. I don't, but so, and at the same time, I was getting all this modeling stuff and everything was making a lot of sense up here. And it was so crazy that I went through like a 10-year dance training and career completely disembodied. Like there was no sense of feeling what was going on here. Everything was about how can I shut this down to just work for this the most. And I found really good formulas to do it. And one of them was literally just restricting any intake of pleasure, which had mostly to do with food. I was like, oh, if I eat less, I didn't know it at the time, but what was happening was my body was going into survival mode. I could produce more. I could perform better. I was like, well, if I eat, then I get full, then I have to poop. Like, and so I just won't eat. Duh. Then my period cut out. And I was like, you guys, I am mastering this thing. I have no bodily functions. This is really good. So I operated like that for a long time. And I was dancing. And And it was actually plant medicine that came in through a really scary thing that I attribute to like the first sort of tower card that was pulled on that. Because I was literally in high school, I graduated, it was like top honors, NYU, full scholarship. I'm going to Paris to model before I go. Everything's so hot. And and I was able to just sort of numb myself and have fun and just I never even got into like drugs and things like that because I was so high on just the affirmation, that external validation of like, you're good. And I would just ignore the little voices. It's like, maybe you're not good. I was like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And I was just on that until on my 19th birthday. I don't know if you were there for this actual event, but on my 19th birthday, which was like the golden birthday, 19 on the 19th, one of our good friends was like force feeding me this weed edible. And I didn't do any of that stuff. And I don't know how many milligrams I took in that moment. No, I was not prepared for any milligram in that moment, much less whatever was fed to me. It must have been a lot because then later when I did more powerful plant medicines, I was like, this was this was that. And I went, it was like this, all the structures that I had in there that were very, very fragile in 1 second was like, and it turned into this dark, 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 dark spiral that was never ending. And it was the first time I was like, oh, I'm insane. And I came out of that. It took me like a month to recover and just like feel okay in the world. And that was the first time I started feeling things in my body where I was like, I don't know if what I'm doing is anything has anything to do with my soul and me. But I wasn't even using those words yet. I was just like, it was basically like, who the F am I?
Yeah.
And And it was a long, long, long process of sort of like falling back into these addiction to this thing and being really good at this thing and then realize, and healing and then going back to this thing and then a little more healing and then going deeper and like that for maybe like 2 or 3, maybe 4 years, like 20. That was like age 19 to 24 was like that back and forth. And all the time the dance was still happening. And then another experience with weed took me like fully into just like this isn't working anymore. And I just remember like I was still in that loop in my body and I was doing all the motions in New York and like the dance world and like the robot thing. And I had this deep, deep sense that I couldn't get rid of like, what is this for? And then everything started seeming ridiculous to me. And I just remember towards the last year of college, like being in the dance rooms and just being like, I literally don't get it. And my body couldn't physically do it. And the choreographer started being like, get this girl out because I couldn't do it. And I just didn't understand. I was like, I don't understand what we're doing in this room, learning these moves and then performing it for like people who don't care and don't get it. And that was just getting heavier and heavier and heavier until I was like, I need to get out of New York.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'm gonna go to Miami. I remember thinking, I was like, I'm gonna go to Miami. I'm gonna be so cute and tan and fit, and like my life's gonna be good. I'm gonna do so. And I got to Miami, and my body started changing. My skin started changing. Like it was a big death. And I was like, this is not cute. But I couldn't get out. It was like I had to stay and stay and feel more and stay and feel more. And I finally started feeling in my body. And it took a lot of slowing down and being in that place where I was like, I hate this body. I don't like the way it looks. I don't like the way it feels. It feels disgusting. I went through my life for like 3 years in a body that felt like that and just fighting it, fighting it, fighting it, fighting it, fighting it. But then also when I moved to Miami and I started feeling was where the Jellyfish Jam came to be, which was kind of like the first reclamation of all of this. Where I got to Miami and I was like, none of this feels good. I hate it here, but I can't leave. I don't know why I can't. I have to stay. That feeling of just, I have to stay. And then there was this awareness that came in that was like, this is a magic city. It's literally nicknamed Magic City. If you want something to happen here, you have to make it happen, Allegra. And that's the magic. And it's going to happen. Just make it happen. And so I started teaching dance, guiding these dance classes for non-dancers. And I started with teenage girls. I started with my sister and her friends and just like developing my own way of explaining what it felt like to move the body from an actual true place, whatever that meant. And that started developing, and then that led to like other plant medicines and eventually just led to like I never went into ballet class again. I never auditioned for a dance thing again because and I don't think that's ridiculous in the world. I think that world is needs to exist and I love it for the people who are in it, but I literally my body wasn't functioning in it anymore. It would not produce energy to play that role out. And I was getting a lot of energy from doing things like the Jellyfish Jam and starting to like slow down and feel in and communicate that medicine and share it. And and that eventually led to the moon dance and where I am now, which feels like me.
Well, it's so beautiful because I remember you were starting the Jellyfish Jam, and I think you came to New York to visit, right? And
Hmm.
like, I want to do a Jellyfish Jam at like the Yoga to the People studios.
Yes.
Like I'm there, and I think that there were like four of us there,
Yes.
and we had so much fun. And then they came in and told you had to turn down the music, and I was like, "Fuck y'all." I was so annoyed for you. Like you were fine, and I was like, shut up. I hate you guys." I was like, we were having so much fun.
Wow.
How dare you censor our joy? And it's so beautiful to think back on that, that I was at like one of the very first ones with you and to see how
Yeah.
it's grown and to also see how differently your body moves these days. I saw a video of you dancing the other day on your story and I was like, oh my God, that's her juice. Like that is her like fuerza right there. Like that is that's the side of her body that moves that I never saw in college. I had never seen you move your body like that in college. And I feel similarly, especially when I was in the jungle. I was like dancing around a lot and I was listening to medicine music and also listening to music in Spanish. That's what I do the majority of the time, and feeling the rhythms in my body and
Mm.
my hips and feeling like my breasts shaking and my ass twerking and being like, oh my God, like I never was allowed to do this. And feeling the way in which, like I said, that juice like just exudes from you when you unlearn all of those layers of the perfectionism and of the restriction and of the control. Like the fact that I thought that that was my truest expression as a dancer is laughable now because I'm like, oh my God, like there was no joy.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what it is. There was no joy. And
Because there could, I don't know, I feel like you have to have a very specific kind of coding to enjoy that environment. I still to this day don't, I'm like, I commend the people who are enjoying that. Like that someone's telling you how to move it and it's repeating over and over and over and the mirrors and it's all for like this future viewer. I'm like, what?
it's different. And there was a point in time where I think I did love it, and I feel the same. Like before I left the States to travel in South America, before I bought my like one-way ticket to go back to the jungle, I had two dance jobs that I was contracted for, and I was like, I can't do this because I had started my path with Jackie, I started my medicine path, and everything in my life started crumbling, and dance went with it. Like that version of dance really went with it. I was just like, why would I? Why would I
Yeah.
go to this cold studio to rehearse multiple times a week to perform this thing that we're only going to do like 2 weekends in a row, like, and get paid no money and suffer and struggle and it's cold and my body's falling apart and like, is this really my dharma? You know, and for some people it might be, and I know that for me it
Yeah.
just wasn't, because if it had been, I would still be doing it.
Yeah.
There's some people like our friend Nando, like the way in which his dance path has unfolded and the way in which he has consistently gotten jobs where he gets to be like his fullest form.
Yeah.
That's so rare.
Yeah. And because there's a flow, it's like for him, he doesn't have to compromise the way his body moves, how his spirit runs. It's like he knows, not that he knows, it's like he can inject that and he's still him. And I watched him like put on this whole character and walk out and just kind of like, okay,
Right.
that was fun. I'm like,
Right.
that is so cool.
Yeah.
I
And really,
was so perturbed by everything that we were put through that it was like, this is clearly not,
yeah.
doesn't work.
Well, you kind of touched on it already. Okay, wait, pause. Who gave you the weed edible? I remember this story. Who gave it to you?
Max freaking Friedstein, who was always, I had like three defining or two defining weed moments with him in college. I literally didn't touch any of this stuff. And I was so sensitive and also didn't eat food. So anything I put in my body was like,
The only thing you had in your body was an edible. You hadn't eaten in a week, and it was just edibles. Okay,
the
I thought,
first time I remember, he was like my first friend, and we were 3 months into college. I was still like getting to know everyone. I had a very intense facade. Like my Scorpio rising was so exacerbated in the first 6 months of college. And I was just like, I'm the cool girl, like no one will break this thing. And he was like, I have this golden weed. And he was like literally selling this weed to me. He was like, nobody has this weed in the world. This weed comes from the West Coast. That. We smoked it. And I had the craziest trip for another story, like on Second Ave. And then I was like, I'm never touching his weed again. And then a few months later, he was like, no, this is a brownie that has weed in it. So it's sweet and nice and whatever. And he's like force feeding it to me. And I thought it worked the same way as taking a hit of weed. So I was like, I don't feel it. He was like, have more, have more. I was like, I still don't feel it. He was like, have
oh
more. And I ate the whole,
no,
I ate the whole brownie. And we were in that studio in freaking whatever the dorm was called. Like, imagine having a ceremony in that basement
no.
studio of the dorm. Like the entities that are roaming around there are not okay. And I just like blew open my whole energetic body and was no, and I was not well. And there was, it was like Max was there, who at the time was Paul was there, and Lisa, and I was like, I don't know these people and I don't know myself. And every time I close my eyes, I go into this insane spiral that makes me want to die. And when I open my eyes, I'm in this weird basement with these people that I do not know. And and literally all structures of safety, of belonging, of identity, of everything just fell out from underneath me in 1 minute. And I was like, this is the worst day of my life. And it ended up being the best because that's where everything started to, oh,
Well, that's thank you for sharing that. That's hilarious. I had a feeling I was like, it must have been with these people, like the only people I could think about. But and I think that that's a very common thing is that anybody who goes a plant medicine path very often has had experiences with other medicines, usually weed or like just like tripping mushrooms or like doing something like that, or even like LSD or like some kind of psychedelic journeying.
yeah,
And then they find a ceremonial path, and it's like, oh, this is how an altered state of consciousness is meant to be stewarded and protected
yeah,
and guided and guarded.
yeah,
So I'd love to hear, well, so yeah, I mean, we both kind of started our path with specifically the medicine of ayahuasca within like the few months of each other. I remember I
yeah,
told you, I'm going to Colombia to drink yahe, and you were like, I just sat in my first ceremony. You're gonna have an amazing time. And I was like, what? And so I would love to hear kind of how you found that and
yeah,
how you feel that your work with the plant teachers has transformed your understanding of like art, movement, spirituality, and also womanhood. What has that brought you?
yeah. Wow. Um, yeah, so it's very tied to Miami. I have a lot of respect for this land, even with all the changes it's going through and all the, all the stereotypes about Miami are true. And there's also some indigenous, deep, deep magic here beyond like what I can even say. And I feel honored to be from this land and to be here for as long as it's here. And it was actually Max that told me once when he was visiting here, he was like, this is Atlantis. And I'm like, oh yeah. And it's getting more and more like that, where I'm like, we're kind of underwater, but and the people look like aliens and the structures look alien-like, and somehow it's working. And so being moving from New York, like I was saying, it felt, when I think of that time period of like my early 20s, it was like straight lines and then huge, like oblong circles, and just fluctuating between all this rigidity and all this trying to like get my life in order and be good. And then all of it just turning into this like, and like falling in love and discovering all these new things and then getting freaked out and trying to get, and just that fluctuation all the time. And some things were really flourishing beautifully. The Jellyfish Jam was flourishing. I had just finished my yoga teacher training in New York when I moved back to Miami. And so yoga, there were certain things where I was like, okay, this is me and my voice while I was teaching yoga. Something was making sense. It felt very different than the dance world. And where I felt like alignment, I felt I wasn't fighting against myself at every turn, and people were coming to me and like, "Oh, what you said resonates," which was the opposite of what I felt in the dance rooms, where it's like I would do something and try really hard, and then the choreographer would be like, "No." I was like, "Shoot." So I was in Miami. I was doing a lot of the Jellyfish Jam stuff, which at first I would call a guided dance party for years. I was like, it's just a guided dance party. Just come dance. And now I'm like, no, this is a ceremony of movement. And we're serving each other medicine just differently. We're not taking anything that alters our state of consciousness, but we're activating energies and moving things enough that you activate an inner medicine that is really, really powerful and takes you into an altered state of consciousness through the body too. So I was doing that, and I was still struggling. I was still what I would call like in the eating disorder healing process, which was so long. And I'm also really grateful for it because it taught me truly like how long healing takes in nature. And I remember these moments where I was like, I will never not think this way. I will never be able to feel okay in my body. Like there will always be tension around food. There will always just be this kind of distaste and distrust for my own shape. And now I look back on that, I'm like, whoa, healing is real. It just takes a long time. And I'm really grateful for that lesson that came through my whole life for years and was really ingrained like in my molecular. So I was in that and yeah, just going through a lot of dips and a lot. I was looking for something like answers. There was this feeling of like there is something out there that I need to get. And a lot of things happened. Something that was really interesting too is I moved back from New York to Miami in 20 May of 2018. I was still kind of going in and out of New York. That's when we did that Jellyfish Jam that you were at. And then 2020, the pandemic started. So it was like a year and a half later, the whole world changed. And that was huge for everyone and for me, where I felt like this, it was kind of that feeling of that edible that I had taken of like the ground falling out from underneath me. And then the process I started to do to build after that happened to the world. And I kind of felt it where I was like, oh, we practiced this already. We have been preparing for this. I didn't know, but and the pandemic happened and I felt really like aligned with what was happening in the world where I was like, I know how to like help myself in this moment. And I think I can help other people move through this crazy world transition that's happening. And and I was so grateful to be in Miami and I was like, I think this is why I left New York. Like something was coming. Like the empire had to fall. And I started doing the jellyfish jams outside because of the pandemic, and that started to change everything as well. And there was this understanding of nature and what was happening when we got into that altered state. After like 30 minutes of dancing, you would go into this kind of trance and something would shift, and then the way nature would start to speak. And we did an event in my backyard. This was 2021. So it was like a year after the pandemic had started. The whole world had changed. All this stuff was happening. I had also kind of dove in deep into Judaism again, and I was really exploring all those rituals and the feminine. And we did an event in my backyard. A friend came from the West Coast. He was doing an indigo dyeing portion, and I led like a meditation and some movement. It was all very deep, like this image of 30 people in the backyard, like dipping fabrics into this deep, dark vat of this naturally grown indigo and like taking it out. And it was very ancestral, but at the time I did not see it as that deep. So we had moved a lot that day. And then, of course, like 7 people are left in the backyard. And he's like, I brought this weed from the West Coast. And I was like, oh no, like weed almost killed me a few years ago. I don't touch that anymore. And then I was like, yeah, lighten up, Allegra. And I took like one hit. And then again, it was like everything I had built up in Miami and all this new idea I had had about my healed self. And I was still very like dogmatic about, okay, now we don't do dance world and this is what healing is and like slow down and eat whatever you want. And then I had gotten rigid about these new ideas about myself and like it's not about what it looks like at all and all this stuff. And I was still very, it had gotten rigid. And then that started crumbling again. And I was like, I don't know anything. And this whole feeling too of like, I'm a teacher of the pandemic and like, I know how to deal with the dying world. And then again, it was like, and it's that teacher of weed who I also have so much respect for marijuana. And she to me is like when I need to be schooled and humbled, which I never willingly have gone for her and really sat in ceremony with her, I would like to, but she's come in these very specific moments in my life and she was like, I will school you now. And I was just like, I know nothing. I have no idea what's going on. And I remember waking up the next day and having the same feeling I had in that dorm in my house, which was scary because I was like, I don't know this place that I grew up in. I don't know who my mom is. I don't know who these people that I'm supposed to know who they are. I don't know who I am again. And I remember I was sitting with my mom and she was talking to me and I was still kind of on the effects of that medicine. And I was like, we have had this conversation 1,000,000,000 times. And I just looked at her and I was like, Ma, we need to do ayahuasca. And I had known some people who had gone. I had never thought I would do it. There was a little bit even of a judgment of like, oh, those people are, escapism or whatever. And then she just kind of like looked up. She was like, yeah, we do. And she also was not into any of that. I've never even seen my mom drunk or like slightly, loss of control. Always in very like deep spiritual states, but I had never seen her like let go to something, completely surrender. And she was like, "Yes." And I was like, "What?" And literally an hour later, she was like, "Okay, we're booked in for the end of the month at this ceremony." She had asked like the person she trusted the most. And that's how we ended up with Madrecita Ayahuasca. It was like January 30th, 2021. And my mom and I went to the ceremony in Homestead, so still very close to home. We just drove there for a day. And I met like one of my two, they became like family to me, Jesus and Tere. Incredible. It was, and the first thing that happened in that ceremony was they sat me away from my mom, and she drank earlier than I did because they went around in the circle, and so she was closer to the altar. And as mine was starting to kick in, I had no idea what was happening because the closest thing I had felt was those two experiences with weed. And so I was just kind of like spinning, I remember. And I start hearing my mom's voice as if she is in my ear, even though she's across the circle. And I hear her hyperventilating, which I had never heard my mom out of control. And I literally told the ayahuasca in my body, I was like, "I'm so sorry, master plant teacher, but I'm gonna have to bow out of this ceremony because my mom is dying and I need to help her." And the ayahuasca goes, "That's not your mom anymore." And I feel an umbilical cord cut from across the circle. She goes, "That's not your mom." And she goes like this to me and just me tumba, like just throws me down onto the ground and takes me on my journey. And that was the beginning of the experience with the mother and the mother and the mother. And then my mom ended up being fine. She was saved by a selenite wand that Teresita gave her. Um, my mom tells a lot of these stories out loud, so I know it's okay that I share them because she shared them before in public. She still has a selenite wand on her altar, and she's like, "This wand saved my life." And I'm like, "I don't think you were gonna die, but we had to go through this experience of like her dying to herself, me dying to this addiction to that mother-daughter validation, and just kind of like following her thing." And I was really scared in that moment where I was like, "Do I have to like abandon my mom or something?" And we got closer after that over time, but it healed a lot of just these deep soul fears that weren't even conscious. Um, that was my first experience with that plant. And then it was really beautiful. Like, I think that first ceremony was so magic because the ayahuasca was like, she was like, "I'm gonna give you your kind of like your five personal directions." And I remember there were very pinnacle. The first thing was all about the mother. And then if you look at my astrology and all of like my enneagram, all my things like that, everything has to do with like parents, family, home, children, the womb, and the home. And so it was like that theme. And then there was a huge part about writing where I was very, very lost, and I was so overwhelmed by everything that was happening in the ceremony and feeling everyone, and this experience of like, I can feel everyone. This is insane. This is not good. And I was writing, and then it was like, "This is your gift. You have to write." On the most literal sense, I was just like, "What am I doing?" I was like, "Oh, I'm writing." And so that was huge too, because it was something I'd been doing my whole life, but not valuing. And so that was put in place. And then a few other things that felt like, and then it took me a long time to integrate that. To this day, I'm still understanding those lessons that she gave me. And a huge thing about letting go and control. And I loved it so much. And I left that ceremony and I was just like, "This is my new thing. I'm an ayahuasca drinker. Everybody needs to drink ayahuasca. This is what I've been looking for." And I went through 6 months of like a huge process with that. And then I started incorporating psilocybin. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm like a psilocybin ayahuasca girly. Like this is the best thing ever." And I was so excited that 8 months later or less, like 7 months later, I went for my second ayahuasca ceremony, which was that same year. And I was like, "I'm gonna bring my dad. Duh." And so we're sitting with the same people in Homestead with my dad on his birthday. And there it was like ayahuasca was like you cannot talk about me the way you've been talking about me. You cannot be telling everybody to do me. You cannot, like, we're not besties. I'm your teacher. And that ceremony was really interesting because I didn't prepare at all. Because I was kind of like waitlisted. We were sending my dad for his birthday, and then I got a call the night before. There was like a spot opened up, want to come? And I was like, let me pull a card about it. And I pulled the death card. And I was like, that means I should go. And so I went, and it was very dense. It was the opposite of, and it was the father, and it was watching my father in his density, and so much pain, and so much pain, and this huge experience I had about being left behind because I had also not prepared and wasn't really prepared in any way. When I showed up and I drank the medicine, it didn't kick in until probably the last hour of ceremony. But all of that was very strategic of the medicine and spirit showing me all of this. In the moment, I was like, this is wrong. It's glitched. Like we need the medicine is wrong. It's not working. In the end, it was, and I had a big experience with a spider who was guiding me through patience and weaving in the center and waiting and just weaving from the center while you wait. And then in the last hour, it was like everything kicked in. And I started seeing all the beauty and the color in that density and in the father and in the masculine. And I was moving in the experience with my mom. I was writing a lot. And in this one, I started dancing. And I started on my back, and I was like, and I could remember what it was like to be a baby on the bed when I was a baby, and like moving my hands and feet and being so enamored by movement and by being in a body. And it was this like exalting joy. And I remember I was bringing down codes, and I was like, oh my God, like this is what it's like to move. Like this feels so good. And it was the first time I was really like, oh my God, this feels delicious. Like this is the best food I've ever eaten, is this movement. And then I went through like another 6 months integrating that ceremony. And then I went to the other extreme, which was also something that ayahuasca was teaching me a lot about, this extremism. My son is on the 29th degree of Aquarius. So it's this very like all in, and all or nothing, and that kind of feeling that I had my whole life. Like I found my teacher, it's the Messiah, and now that person's shit. Now it's the worst thing ever. Now I found this is the Messiah. Oh, now I'm disappointed. It's the worst thing ever. And that constant teetering. And so I went in again into like a 6 month period where now I was like, ayahuasca is the scariest thing ever. No one should do this. I don't know if I'll ever recover. I felt like depression and stuff I had never really like experienced, just density, like true density. And with my boyfriend at the time, I was like, but I still want him to go, so I'll go with him. And then so I've only done ayahuasca 3 times, and it was the 3 points of 2021. And so at the like one of the last days of 2021, we went to the last ceremony, and it was the only one that was at night, and it was with the same people. And I was kind of just going, it kind of felt almost to repent. Like I was like, I just need to talk to ayahuasca again, and sort of like, I'm sorry, like the mother and father, that was a lot. And so I just need to go like as me now. And I thought she was gonna take me into kind of like the father thing again and just beat me up. And it was the most beautiful. I didn't even cry a single tear. And I was like, I need a purge, ta ta ta. She was like, just exhale, Allegra. And it was the night energy. And I learned so much about the night in that ceremony, and the feminine and the dark, and that like relief of the night, and the ability to just relax and shapeshift into whatever you needed to be and just breathe. And I learned to breathe, and we were cracking up the whole time, all the women. And it was like the cracking up was like helping the men that were just down deep in there. And it was a lot of just this. And I went out into and then it was the first time I stood up in a ceremony and moved away from the circle. And I was like, I think I can finally do this. And I went out into the grove, and I was asking these questions about my future. And I was dancing, 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 dancing along the trees. And it was like, plant the future, plant the future, plant the future, plant the future. And I was like, okay, plant the future. And I was like, but how? And it was like my body was answering the question. It was like through your movement. And and then I felt this huge relief, and it felt like that kind of sealed this very important like three-part book of ayahuasca for that chapter in my life. And then shortly thereafter, a beautiful woman, Paloma Tepa, called me, who has a project called Plant the Future, an amazing company. And she was like, I just had ayahuasca and she told me to help you. I was like, what? And she was like, come do your jellyfish jams at Plant the Future. This was at the beginning of 2022. And then I spent 6 months in this gorgeous space she has in on the river, on the Miami River in Miami. It's Tequesta land. And that's where everything started to really shift and true healing occurred. And this like integration of everything that happened over the, I think I was 26 at that point, or 25, like all the integration of everything started happening at Plant the Future during these jams. And I started understanding the ceremony of movement and how to host what I was hosting in a ceremonial way, and that land and the people who started coming and the way people were showing up and the medicine that was given, everything started to shift there. And that's how, and then Paloma was the first person to tell me about the moon dance. She was like, you have to go. Like, of course, you already know about this. And I was like, what is that? And through that and through Tere, who serves ayahuasca, she connected me to this other incredible medicine woman in Mexico, Ada. I ended up going to Mexico and I met her. And everyone who talked to me about the moon dance from the first moment that Paloma mentioned it was this like, of course you already know about this and you are already going. And I was like, it sounds amazing. Because I had been in this kind of like, I kind of want to serve ayahuasca. This thing really calls me. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. But also, this medicine is so intense. And the way people show up and what it does to people, like, that is so intense. And I wish I could somehow do this, but not serving that medicine, basically hosting ceremony and holding circle space. And then Ada described what the moon dance was to me. And I was like, oh my God, this is the culmination of everything. This is a medicine circle through dance and through the feminine and through the mother and through the womb. And we don't take anything. And it's all through being a woman praying and singing and dancing to the earth and the temazcal. And it was all just like perfect. And it's a bit austere. So it had that extremism that still draws me, like some intensity, some respect, and like that hardness, and also this like freedom and this fullness. And so I ended up going to that. And at the time, I was very flighty and non-committal. And I was like, I don't know if I'll come back. And literally making that commitment to those 4 years taught me about commitment and about deciding. And then it was like, no matter where I've been for the last 3 years in my life and in time and space, it's like in the summer, I'm at the California moon dance doing the prayer. And then whatever happens after that doesn't matter. And I actually like haven't in the time that I was starting, once I started the moon dance, I didn't do any really plant medicines for those 3 years until just recently that I did like 2 mushroom journeys. But that is to say, the medicine of my life became the danza de la luna for the past few years. It's a long-winded journey, but that's the story of how we ended up at the moon dance.
I'm so happy that you didn't censor any of it because that's the thing is that that's how any medicine, not just a plant medicine, but any medicine in life works is like mysteriously and surprisingly and perfectly, and the timing is always right. And I loved what you said about how your commitment to the moon dance is what taught you commitment, because I feel very similarly in that my commitment to my path with Jahe is what has taught me about commitment, because there are so many times when I'm like, this shit is too hard. Like, this is really demanding and like I don't want to do it anymore. And whenever I get to that point, either when I'm in the jungle or when I'm out of it and I'm just like, fuck this, I think about my teacher, Abuelo Perwin, who always would just say, like, nunca deje de tomar, like, never stop drinking. which isn't meant to be the path for everyone. Not everyone is to drink. Not everyone is meant to drink as much ayahuasca as I have. Not everyone is meant to drink as much as my teacher ever did, or as indigenous people do, or anyone. Like,
Yeah.
there's no right or wrong way to do it, but never stop drinking medicine is not just like your cup of, yeah, hey, like never stop drinking medicine is like show up for your work, show up for your dharma, show up for your family, for your lineage, for your community, but more importantly, show up for yourself, because you know that when you continue coming back to your path with that humility, with that like curiosity, with that joy, with that playfulness, but also with your shame and also with your fear and also with your doubt, like, and all of your
Mhm.
shit and your anger and like, feeling mistrustful, or I guess distrustful, or, anything that you cut, like, you still show up. And I think that that's the most beautiful gift that all of the altered states of consciousness that I've navigated through have taught me, is like, move through the fear and continue just showing up with the medicine that you have to offer to it. Like, you
Yeah.
actually get to just sit out of this, like, commit to your medicine and
Mhm.
sharing what it is you have to offer, which is what you do in this world and what I do in this world and what so many incredible women are doing. And I'm seeing it younger and younger in women who are
Mhm.
showing up and who are like, I have gifts
Mhm.
my ancestors brought me. I have writing to offer. I have movement to offer. I have song to offer. I have like a whole path with birthwork, which I don't think we have time to get into. I think that's for another episode. But like, all of these medicinal offerings that have been our birthright from the beginning, that I think women are waking up to earlier and earlier and earlier these days, is something that I, of course, see in you and that I see in pretty much every woman that I get to surround myself with now, which is
Yeah.
such a blessing. So thank you for all of it, and thank you for giving us the whole story. I love just about it. I think I do want to wrap up, so that we
Yeah.
can get to, like, our next portion, our like paywalled episode. But what I'd love to close with is kind of something that you already touched on, which is like your relationship with your mother and her having her
Mhm.
spiritual path, your mother being this really, really like, how to explain, like, such a personality, she's a Leo, like such a strong, vibrant, like solar energy, and having such a vibrant path that she has all these offerings that she shares with the world as a medicine woman stepping into her elder years. And so I'd love to hear about how you guys now work together, like the transformation
Mhm.
you feel like has occurred, how you
Mhm.
guys work together, and then also the really beautiful, it's mother-daughter offering, right? Or like,
Uh-huh.
yeah, mother-daughter retreat that you guys are doing coming up. I'd love for you to share about that to close.
Yay, thank you. Um, yeah, so based on all the stories, it's like my mom is very present. And I used to judge that a lot. Like I was kind of had this weird jealousy of the girls who like don't talk to their mom or kind of like hate their mom. I was like, that's kind of cool. And I had that complex for a while where I was like, do I like connect with my mom too much? Um, that first ayahuasca ceremony helped a lot subtly throughout over time. It started to undo a lot of just the stuff that didn't need to be there of like too much attachment. Um, and yeah, I think our karma is that we get along really well and we're interested in similar things. And I took that for granted. I always take it for granted, honestly. I often take it for granted still to this day, where I'm just like, it becomes a casual thing because it's my day to day. It's like I'm interacting with her all the time and our interests and the things we talk about and the conversations we have. And then people witness us and they're like, whoa, this is so rare. It's so cool that your mom loves this stuff. I'm like, my mom gave me this stuff. What are you talking about? Like, and then I really, understand the depth of it. But I think it's really karmic and it comes with its challenges too, where I'm learning now and in the Saturn return, it's like to know what is hers in the gifts and in the challenges, where I can help her, where she can help me, and then what is mine in the gifts and in the challenges that doesn't have to spill over. But we also complement each other really well because she's very outgoing, she's very social, she can just like she just lights up a room, and I've embodied that more being around her, but my nature is much more shy and reserved, and I take my time, and I do not like this energy of like promoting myself, and she's the big, if she likes what you do, she is the biggest hype woman. We were at a dinner the other night and she literally just started hyping people up that she had just met. Like she hears your thing and she's like, you need to do this and you need to talk to this person. She's that energy. So it's very complimentary because I help her sort of like, refine it and be tasteful about it. And she helps me just say it, Allegra, go share your thing. Go
Yeah.
share it. And it's always been like that. So that's one aspect of how we work together. And then she's always, it's so natural. Like I'll just be talking about something. She's like, look into this teacher. Go see this. Oh my God, I just watched this thing. You need, and she has connected me to almost all of my teachers. And then there's some teachers that we share and some paths that we share and friendships in these worlds that we share, and some where it's like she's shown me and I go and I'm like, you have to see this. And she's like, that was not for me. And I run like the wind and she doesn't, and vice versa. So the moon dance is one of those places where like she was the source of how I got connected to all those people, but she hasn't come to the moon dance with me. But then I bring all that, the saumeros and the copal and those songs into the stuff we do where she's teaching her mystic flute and she's sharing the sufi zikr, and something really cool that's like very metaphorical for this whole journey we've been on, which is that in the last 2 years, I became a birth doula, and she just last month got her death doula certification. So that feels very like, I'm her daughter, I'm the birth doula, and she's my mom, she's the death doula. And I have this strong feeling we're also going to switch. And she's going to become a birth doula, and I'm going to become a death doula because that actually feels like our natural energy more. Um, so it's very cool. We're very like, yeah, complimentary, and I feel so honored to have her as my mom because she really keeps things in check in it's all very, very natural, almost to a fault fluid, because no one's like doing the taxes, literal and metaphorical, because we're so like flowy and improvisational and creation. It's a lot, there's a lot of feminine energy in the house and in the fam and in the way we work. And we'll just like host an event and we talk about it like in the car on the way there, and then all this stuff flourishes because we work really well improvising and feeling. And so we're hosting this retreat, which feels like it's been a long time coming because we've been doing things together and separate for a long time. And it's been really interesting because something really cool to wrap this up is I was my mom's Saturn return. So when she was going through her first Saturn return, she was bringing me into the world. And so now she's going through her second Saturn return, I'm going through my first, and we're going through it together. And that kind of feels like what this mother-daughter retreat is. And I hadn't even thought of that when we first started dreaming it up, but it's brought up a lot of stuff in these moments where I'm like, we are not in a good place. We should not be hosting a mother-daughter retreat. And then I'm like, oh no, this is the mother-daughter retreat. And then it's so interesting because we put it out there, and I've been meaning to post about this and write about it soon, like kind of the shame that that has produced in people, and people writing to us like with that subtle shame of like, I'd really like to go, but my daughter would never, or my mom would never, or it's so cool that you guys. And I'm like, oh, I hope this isn't being communicated as like you can only come if you have a perfect relationship with your mother or daughter. But it also comes off that way because it takes a lot of orchestration and organization to get a mother and daughter to go on a trip together to something and to both be interested in what that trip offers. So we're kind of like realigning it now to be a women's retreat with this theme of the mother-daughter, so that if you can't get your mother or your daughter or your grandmother to come with you, you can come by yourself or with a friend, and we'll play and work with those dynamics, because I think also something that I've learned a lot through this journey with my mom, and she has too, is to lighten up about it, because I think just the trends in psychology and the way it's talked about, like it can get very dense and it kind of becomes this thing like I'll never heal my mother wound. um and I just feel like the mother is the mother, like that there will always be stuff, but it's not meant to feel like crap forever. And in the end, it's like that's the person that brought you here, and they're terminal. At some point, their life is going to end, and so is yours. And you're going to wish you would have honored them more. And it's like they're going to be annoying, but also that's your mom, and she brought you here. And that's what the indigenous way taught me. It's like just get simple and thank the thing that is sustaining you here, and stop trying to like make it this complicated, and like the like psychological buzzwords. It's like life hurts, there are painful things, and your mother brought you here. So thank her. And thank her again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
So that's the mother-daughter retreat is going to be like a big thank you to the Mother Earth and to ourselves, and then how we just remother ourselves, which is something that a powerful medicine woman at the moon dance taught me. Like she just started talking one day about the inner child, and then she said the inner mother, and I was like, how come I had never heard that or thought of that? And this one inner mother came online that knew how to talk to that little girl and soothe her and validate her and be like, you're good, even when there's no external reference point for whether or not you're good. So yeah.
Beautiful. I'm excited for you guys. And
Yeah.
it's also something that has been deep in my own path. Like, I actually remember, I mean, I've had a long process with my mother that I won't get into, but I remember for years I was working on healing it, years and years and years and years and years. And at a certain point in my own work with medicine, um, it was like my mom was still trying to come in, and I had to like set a really clear boundary and be like, I need to work with my dad right now, actually.
Mm,
I'm not doing this. Like, I have given this particular relationship like so much of my time. Like, I have to work with my father. Thank you very much. And for
hmm
for years on my path with Jahid, like I was only working with the masculine, and that was reflected in my teachers, with my taita, with like my male elder shaman abuelo, like grandfather teacher who brought me in as his daughter, like that's who I was focused on. And then he died. And then recently, it's only been within like the past probably almost 9 months that I found a medicine woman who I now learn with. And it's like, oh God, like I have to go through all this shit with the mother now. I've like said that I'm not going to do. And it's really
Yeah.
present for me. And I also acknowledge like that shared feeling of shame of like, how am I supposed to talk about like we need to support mothers and we need to support birth and we need to support women and we need to support babies, even if I still have deep wounds with my mom, who I love and who I respect and who I also don't always love and don't always respect. Like, it's hard and it's beautiful. And I think that that honesty and vulnerability that you're coming to it with, of just like, actually, we're not the perfect mother daughter team. We love each other, we complement each other. And also, like, we have our shit and we still show up and we still say thank you. So I'm
Oh,
I'm excited for you.
thank you.
Transition into our exclusive episode where we're going to be talking about something very, very special and sacred, and a lot about birth and death and ceremony and your experience at the moon dance for people who want to learn more of like what that is.
Yes,
I'm super excited.
me
Um,
too.
People can subscribe to that on Substack. I'll put all the links in the bio. Allegra, where can people find you? I'm gonna link it, of course, we can share.
My Instagram is at the Jellyfish Jam, and I've been writing a lot on Substack. The Substack is called In and of Itself. And it's also under my name, Allegra Preuss. And I just started a WhatsApp chat that's been really fun, and I'm just like adding numbers on there. I really like to work like that. I suffered for a long time with this like weird, impending, large scale spaceship that I thought was making its way towards me. And I was like, at some time, I'm gonna have to become a brand and this company and the thing. And I'm just like, I don't think that will ever be my vibe. And I like just having people's numbers on my phone and hosting my stuff in the backyard. And obviously, it's evolving and it's shifting and it can become more professional. And it is. But yeah, you can message me on Instagram and I'll add you to the WhatsApp chat and we can chat.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. It's been really
Thank you.
nice to just drop in with you and hear parts of your story that I had never heard about and to share all of this. So, as always, thank you so much for sharing your medicine and I'm
Mm,
excited for us to continue over on Substack. Someone told me that all the hot girlies are on Substack this year. What? 2025. So follow both of us.
it's really cool on there. It's really interesting, and everyone's very like
It's different.
getting off social media, but on Substack, and you read longer form things.
It
It's
gives more
it's been interesting.
to like
Yeah,
that I know both you and I love to go into. So
yeah.
I will link all of that below. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you.